Section A, the 2025 summer exam question on the Tempest. And this is question 1. It was an extract-based question. And this was the section from Act 3, Scene 3, the Harpy Scene. I'm going to try and highlight some of the things I would say to answer this question. You're going to sort of annotate and add detail to your sheet so you know what to add in the future. Okay. Right, start broad. Start first of all by talking, where does the extract come into play? Well done to those people who talked about how Act 3s in comedies usually have the potential for death. You know, if they were tragedies, there would be a death in this scene, but in Act 3 comedies, we tend to have the potential for death, the threat of death, but it doesn't actually happen. Okay. Starting broad, you're also thinking about what happens just before this scene. Now, well done to anyone who need a pen, who talked about the juxtaposition of scenes, right? The placing together of different contrasting scenes. So the scene that comes before this scene is Act 3, Scene 2. What happens in Act 3, Scene 2? You can tell me. Good. It's the subplot scene between Caliban, Trinculo, and Stefano, and there's a comic scene that goes on. Ariel's putting voices on Trinculo, and then Stefano's threatening to beat him up. Then they're threatening to go and kill Prospero. So while it's a comic scene, it's also suggesting usurping. It's a comic scene also, so it's funny for the audience. And what Shakespeare does that, he juxtaposes that comic scene with a much more serious scene here. So he treats the same kind of sin, this lust for power, in a comic way, but in this scene, it's treated in a much more serious way, and it's a much more kind of religious sense of sin being punished. So well done to people who just talked about, just summarize the extract broadly, okay? In this scene, there's a heavy theme of religion and punishment for sin, and the noblemen facing their punishment by the Harpy, and ultimately by Prospero. Okay. So I would talk broadly about where the passage comes in the whole scheme of things. And by talking about how this scene juxtaposes or contrasts with the scene that's just come before it, and is also, it's similar in many ways, you're talking about structure, which people don't often talk about. Okay. So Alonso, says, stand to and feed, although this is my last, he sees this as my last meal. And students talked about how this was reminiscent of the Bible's event, the Last Supper, perhaps. Alonso is remorseful, he's full of remorse. He says, this will be my last meal. As we know, he's thinking of he's thinking of his son. And he tells the others to stand to and do as we do. Rather than rejecting the meal, he was planning or intending to eat it, I think, here. And stand to and feed, although my last, no matter, since I feel the best part, come and do as we do. So he is suggesting we're going to eat. But you would be right to suggest that his language shows him in authority. Okay? He's giving imperatives. Stand to and eat. So he's in command. But he's thinking about his death, and perhaps there's that suggestion of the Last Supper. Now, that's really, most of you talked about the effect of thunder and lightning. Good. You know, it heralds a greater power, a godly power. It heralds godly punishment. And it also reminds us that Prospero's in charge. And well done to those people who kind of related this also to Act 1, the beginning, and the Tempest scene, the idea that he's in charge.
Can we talk about stage like in depth?
Yes, you can.
Like, would you not?
Yeah. You won't be picked up your voice won't be picked up on this, but I'm just going to relate. Someone's asked about the actual way the question's asked. You are expected to look closely at the language of the extract, and you're looking at the dramatic effects of the language, but also the dramatic effects in the extract. You should be looking at stagecraft. Yes, correct. So you would comment on those stage directions. We get the sense that it's foreboding, it's suggesting something serious is going to happen. And then we've got Ariel like a harpy. Knowing what a harpy is, you mentioned that it's a biblical, it's a mythical creature of vengeance, and it jumps upon the table. So maybe the height to the audience showing its power over the men. And then people talked about the banquet vanishing, the idea of putting a treat and putting a feast in front of these men and then taking it away as a form of punishment. The idea of them having a meal, and in Alonso's case, the last meal reminds us of the Last Supper, and perhaps the idea of someone betraying their Lord. Again, reminds us of how Prospero had been betrayed by Antonio and Sebastian. Okay, now this is quite a big speech by Ariel. Any big speech you get in the exam, you should break it down and look at how there's different sections. And really good students are going to be grouping ideas together, right? You're going to be grouping ideas and maybe using cluster quotes to show the examiner that you can marshal the evidence in front of you. This is the kind of exam question that forces you to quote from the extracts. You should have the extracts in front of you. You're looking at the extract. Can I see it? Yeah. So many of you talked about how there's a semantic field of religion, sin, and punishment. So you are three men of sin. Destiny could be fate. That always comes up in tragedies, the idea of destiny and fate. And you live in the lower world. So by implication, Ariel is a creature of the upper world, of the heavens. And so he's addressing these men's sense of sin. And if we were to sort of highlight other examples of that, you might talk about the use of perdition, the idea of everlasting punishment, and maybe there could be some others ones that we might talk about. Your swords of strength. So I'd read it once first time and then I'd scan it. So we might have words to do with sin, destiny, and perdition. So that sense of religion. Then I might talk about the use of water and the constant references in the play to the sea. So the metaphor of water. Well done to those students who talked about how there's water imagery in the play. The Tempest starts with a tempest and a storm, the upheaval of the natural order, which is typical of a comedy. And the idea of water being something that washes away sin. But here, the very sea hath caused to belch you up. The sea is personified. And the idea of belching these men up, this metaphor, this personification, is that these men do not deserve forgiveness yet. They've been belched up. Water is not going to forgive them. And so they're being punished. Then we've got, references to punishment for sin. You are unfit to live. I have made you mad. And even with such like valor, men hang and drown their proper selves. Now, what I might talk about there, in the state you're in, you might just drown yourselves, your proper selves. The idea that they've lost their identity. They've lost their real identity. So I might talk about how this relates to comedy. Now, of course, the men draw their swords. They're not ready to face their sin. And well done to those students who talked about that. They draw their swords. Now, only a few people talked in depth about the next bit. Many people just avoided the next bit and then went to the reaction of different people. Now, you probably needed to look a little bit more. What could you say about this? The language, and remember, how does the language and its dramatic effects? The language is showing Ariel is powerful. Ariel speaks in blank verse, suggesting his power. Ariel's on top of the table looking down on them, suggesting power. Ariel talks in exclamatives, you fools. Look at the punctuation. Okay? He's dismissing of them. He's ridiculing them. You may as well wound the loud winds. Again, there's personification there. You may as well like stab the wind. Well, we literally can't stab the wind. He's using personification to show the uselessness of their actions. You may as well try and kill the water. Well, you can't kill water. So these metaphors are being used to show their powerlessness and the power of Ariel. Okay. You cannot diminish one dowl that's in my plume. Okay. Plume is like feathers. You cannot injure me. Okay. That's a declarative, a statement. So try. And then he says, and if you could hurt me, your swords are now too massy for your strengths. I've made your swords too heavy. Now, the really good answers will see things and connect to elsewhere in the play. Where else have we seen swords become too heavy for people to actually use their power against? Good, Sebastian and Antonio, their swords freeze, they can't use them. You could also talk about Ferdinand when he first sees Prospero as well. Prospero makes his sword too heavy and he's frozen. So the suggestion is that human power is powerless against the power of Prospero and God, if you see his godly experience here. So if you can see things and how they connect to elsewhere in the play, you are touching on structure and how Shakespeare structures his play to have parallels and opposites throughout, deliberate parallels and opposites. And the idea behind that is to show us that man has no power against Prospero, i.e. or God, depending on how you see it. Does that make sense? Okay, so you're taking notes on that. Okay. Now, then we have another section, but remember, the caesura here is highlighting something else. There must be a change in subject matter. If there's a change in subject matter within a big chunk of speech, you should deal with it. And that's my business to you, that you three from Milan did supplant good Prospero, exposed onto the sea, which hath requited him and his innocent child. Now, what Ariel's doing there through those adjectives, good Prospero and innocent child, is showing the heaviness of their sin, their guilt against Prospero and Miranda. He's forcing them to see the error of their ways through those adjectives. Now, some people talked about why is Ariel doing this? Perhaps Ariel's doing it because they're commanded by Prospero to do it, and they want ultimately their freedom. Maybe they don't really feel that Prospero is good, and maybe they're under Prospero's imperative to do it. And that's fine to sort of highlight different ways of seeing things, but that's propositions, really. But you could highlight it briefly. Okay. And again, it's persuasive language. It's saying, look what a bad boy you've been. He doesn't just talk, he talks about his child. Again, it's a motive. It's what is Ariel trying to do? Or the Harpy, it's trying to force them to see their sins. Right? That's really important, and they use language this way. How else do they try to persuade these men to see their sins? What are the other persuasive devices? Okay. And for this foul deed, the powers, delaying, not forgetting, have incensed the seas, yeah, all the creatures against your peace. So again, by doing what they've done, they're saying the powers have incensed the seas and shores. So you have gone against nature. What you have done has gone against nature. And again, you might talk about the connection in this extract that nature is alive. And we've seen that earlier with the sea belching them up. So their sin has gone against nature, and nature is not happy about it. And you might touch on how, you know, the idea of going against the leader is unnatural. The word unnatural comes up in Shakespeare an awful lot. Right. And thee of thy son, Alonso, they have bereft. Well done if you talked about the use of thee. The pronoun thee is looking down on Alonso. Looking down is thee, looking up is you. He's diminishing, the harpy is diminishing Alonso's power with that pronoun. They have left you bereft of a son. You have lost your son. And these powers, are they gods or destiny, Prospero, have asked me, they do pronounce by me lingering perdition, worse than death. So the superlative, worse than death. So what your sentence is worse than death, right? Worse than, so it's a superlative. Shall step by step attend you in your ways, whose wraths to guard you from, which here in this most desolate isle, else falls upon your heads. Right. So your punishment is nothing but heart sorrow and a clear life ensuing. So you've got a life of heart sorrow in order to have a clear life ensuing. So you're going to have to go through sorrow if you're going to have a clear life, is how I see that. Okay? But that's your punishment. Now, so what we've looked at with this extract is a sense of sin, then a sense of how nature's reacting to that sin. It's alive and angry. And then a sense of what your punishment is. Perdition, things worse than death. And on this desolate isle, again, you might talk about how people see the isle. Ariel sees it as desolate here, or the harpy. You will have upon your heads nothing but heart sorrow and a clear life ensuing. So you've got to go through sorrow and pain if you're to have a clear life. Remember what Prospero's mission is. It's to bring these men to salvation. So we're looking at, look at how much we've kind of looked at so far. You know, you're looking at a lot of the text. He vanishes in thunder. Again, the idea of the power. The stagecraft is showing the power. And then soft music shows a transition. Well done to students who talked about the role of music in the play. Then you're talking about structure. These men have the threat of death, so it conforms to comedy. So you're talking about form. And then these shapes again, and dance with mocks and mows. Now, you cannot talk about this question by talking about audience. How do the audience react to this? Well, the audience are seeing a heavenly punishment. So maybe they're fearful of it. But then it changes to a moment of dance and soft music. So there's variety. Okay. On stage, Shakespeare is giving us different things. to make it theatrical. So maybe we've got a little dance section and soft music, again, giving variety. If you do drama, you know that you've got to change it up on stage. You've got to show different things. And so you would talk about how Shakespeare's doing that. Okay. All the time, Prospero is in this scene. And we know that Prospero is controlling this. These men are not going to die. Prospero is controlling it, making them think they're going to die, perhaps. So there's dramatic irony. Prospero keeps the play from becoming a tragedy. He stage manages it so that it's always just in the realms of comedy. Okay. Okay, many of you talked about this. Some of you didn't talk about Prospero's language at all. Right? Again, Prospero uses verse, showing his status. Bravely the figure of this harpy hast thou performed. Again, the use of pronouns shows that Ariel is below him. You might have talked about, and I still can't believe some of you are still saying possessive pronoun. It's possessive adjective. My Ariel, he still possesses Ariel. Again, you might talk about the use of language. There's a lot of religious language in the play. The idea of a grace it had, and we're reminded of grace is salvation. You've followed my instruction, you've devoured my instruction, metaphor. And hast thou nothing bated in what thou hadst to say? You did everything to the letter. You devoured my instruction, did everything to the letter. So you can talk about his letter, how pleased he is through the metaphor of devoured. Often you can get metaphors just in one verb. So, and hast thou, again, nothing bated in what thou hadst to say. So, with good life and observation strange, my meaner ministers their several kinds have done. My high charms work. It's all about Prospero's power. He's still consumed by his power. In many ways, Prospero has lost his identity as well. Like typical of a comedy. Some of you talked about how the real power actually lies with Ariel, but Prospero sees it as his powers. And these mine enemies are all knit up. So again, Prospero is still consumed by vengeance. They are knit up in their distractions. They have been made mad. They are now in my power. Again, you might look at how there's a pattern of words. My power, mine enemies, is consumed with power and revenge. And in these fits I leave them, whilst I visit young Ferdinand, whom they suppose is drowned, and his and mine loved daughter. Maybe we're left thinking that the real tyrant here is Prospero. He's left them mad, and he's consumed by his power. Now, not many of you talked about this stage direction, so highlight it. Now, as you've highlighted it, you now know what to say about it. What would you say about it? Yes. Very good. And what would you say about the proxemics? Prospero exits above. Good. So he resembles a god, punishing them as well. So meaning is conveyed by space on stage. So you should always look at those stage directions. Make a note of that, yeah? Okay. Now, in the last section, it's really important you deal with the ending in any extract, but many of you didn't deal with the ending. And that's really important. This is where you can get more marks because the examiners are thinking about where they're going to end the extract. So if you don't talk about it, then there's a lot of thinking that's got into it you've not really thought about. Now, Gonzalo says, in the name of something holy, sir, why stand you in this strange state? What we can infer from that is what, Anna? What can we infer from Gonzalo? In the name of something holy, sir, why stand you in this strange state? Why not? He doesn't know what's happening. Gonzalo doesn't know what's happening. Why? Good. So we can infer from this is that Gonzalo possibly hasn't seen the harpy because he hasn't been punished in that way. Possibly. Good. Good. Why do you stand in this strange stare? So that interrogative, you could say, well, Gonzalo doesn't seem to have been affected by this. He's seeing everyone else. And why stand you in this strange stare suggests we can see that Alonso has been affected by it. Yeah? Yeah. An interrogative is just a posh word for a question, but you need to use AO1 terminology. There's 4 different types of questions. There's a declarative, an interrogative, a question, an imperative, and an exclamative. It would be good if you use that kind of language. Think about those, okay? And so his interrogative suggests that Alonso has been affected by this. So Alonso is affected by his guilt. So we need to see where's the evidence of this guilt. You could also say by the name of something holy is that religion is associated with Gonzalo and goodness is associated with Gonzalo. Many of you touched on that. So again, it's reminding us of the religious context of this scene, how this scene is important from a religious sense. And Alonso says, it is monstrous, monstrous. What kind of sentence is that, Max? Yeah, it's an exclamative. So, and what does it suggest about him? He's terrified. Yeah, so simply just saying that, you'd get a tick for it. The exclamative, it's monstrous, suggests he's terrified and he's acknowledging his own sin, perhaps. Let's see if there's any pattern of words to do with sin. Can you find any? Have a look in that last section, pattern of words to do with sin. Methought the billows spoke and told me of it. Methought the billows spoke and told me of it. The billows being the wind spoke. And what did they tell him? The winds did sing to me. So what did they tell him? They sung to him, but what did they sing him? Something monstrous. And the thunder, that deep and dreadful organ pipe. Again, what is the role of music here? Music and sound here is relaying his sin. But it also pronounced the name of Prospero. And this is his key line there. It did base my trespass. What does he mean by that, do you think, Rita? It did base my trespass. Done with him. And what is a trespass? Yes. It's another word for sin. So in Christianity, in the Lord's Prayer, we talk about, people talk about forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So all we really need, an audience would see the word trespass and they would understand it's a sin. He's saying the winds did whisper my sins to me. So Prospero has been successful on Alonso. And that is why he understands, and that's why my son is in the ooze bedded. That's why my son is drowned, because I have sinned. Yeah? I have trespassed. Yeah? And I shall seek him deeper than ever plummet sounded. What does he mean by that, do you think, Francesca? I shall seek him deeper than ever plummet sounded. He wants to throw himself out of into the sea, deeper than ever plummet sounded. When we talk about depth, we talk about sounding the depth, which is a verb for measuring depth. I am gonna sink myself deeper than ever a plummet sounded. A plummet is like a little bit of lead that measures depth. I'm gonna go deeper than deep, right? Very good. So if you can see, yeah, so if you can contrast that here with the start of the extract where Ariel talks about you are from the lower land, the sea has belched you up. But by the end of the extract, Alonso wishes to throw himself back into the sea. Now, what's the importance of water, Ellie? Very good. Purification of sin. So it's no surprise that Alonso wants to throw himself in the water. Now, if you've read The Tempest further on, you'll know what Prospero decides to do with his book later on in the play, his magic book. Has anyone read further on? Margot, what does he plan to do with his magic book? He plans to throw his magic book in the sea. So the idea of water is really important. So the scene starts by throwing up and belching up these men of sin, but by the end of it, Alonso wants to throw himself into the water out of his sense of sin. And I want to there lie with him muddied. He exits, and then we're left with a final exchange. Now, those of you who spoke about Sebastian and Antonio at the end, well done, because looking at the end of the extract is really important. Now, of course, Sebastian says, we will fight them one fiend at a time. I'll fight them. And Antonio says, I'll be thy second. I'll be your second in command. I'll fight them with you. Again, Teddy, what's the significance of their response to this? Very good. I don't think your voice carried there, but they refuse to accept their sin at this point. They're fighting against it. And so the audience are left at the end of this extract seeing a sense of spiritual justice being inflicted, lingering perdition. You have three men of sin. The very seas have belched you up. The harpy forces them to see their sin in a very persuasive way. You did supplant good Prospero. You did affect his innocent child. And now you must be punished for your sin if you are to have a clear life ensuing. Prospero, of course, is very happy. But Prospero is also a sinner too, because he has lost his identity and only thinks about revenge, charms, and his power. Gonzalo doesn't see this, but Alonso hears it and sees it. And you might talk about the role of the island, how people hear things on the island. Who else has heard something on the island? What does he say about the sounds of the island? And what does he call the sounds? Does he like them? He calls them sweet airs, Caliban. But the sounds of the island to Alonso are the sounds of his own sin. They did base my trespass. It was a dreadful organ pipe. I did hear the name of Prosper. The winds did sing it to me. The role of music in this play is important. And if you talked about the role of music and how it's used elsewhere, you're talking about structure and stagecraft. And so we ended by seeing how these men of sin don't accept their sin. So there's still work to do. Exit all, Sebastian and Antonio. Okay. Now, It's easy for me to do that, having taught this for a long time. Okay, stop recording. Yeah.